All right. So you sent over some really fascinating stuff on anxiety.
Hmm.
And there's one piece that really jumps out at me,
Yeah.
a book called Conquer Anxiety by
Hmm.
Thomas Falvinter.
Okay.
So let's dive into this and see what we can uncover.
Yeah, it's interesting how the book approaches anxiety,
Yeah.
not as a typical disease,
Right.
but as something manageable,
Okay.
stemming from our fear of discomfort.
And get this, the book is from a nonprofit, GenerationAnxiety.com.
Oh, wow.
And it was written by someone who struggled with anxiety for 38 years
Wow.
before finding his own way out. And now he's sharing these methods for free,
That's incredible.
making it accessible for everyone.
Yeah, that's really powerful.
Yeah.
And it speaks to, I think, a key point here. Over 10% of the world's population
Right.
deals with anxiety.
Yeah.
And he really believes that treatment should be free and available,
Absolutely.
which requires a fresh perspective.
And the book does offer some fresh perspectives.
Yeah.
It talks about how memory keeps anxiety going, how technology might be adding to modern anxiety,
Yeah.
and even a simple method using posters and self-affirmation to reduce it.
So let's start with how the book breaks down anxiety.
Okay.
It argues that anxiety is triggered
Okay.
by our fear of the discomfort that comes with those initial anxiety symptoms.
Yeah, you feel a little anxious,
Yeah.
and then your mind races to the worst-case scenarios.
Exactly.
And that just makes the anxiety worse.
Exactly like a runaway train.
Yeah, like a runaway train.
The book distinguishes between rational and irrational anxiety,
Okay.
focusing on the irrational when the fear is way bigger than the actual threat.
Right.
And the author uses a powerful example from his own life.
He talks about his first panic attack at work.
Yes, it's a very vivid description.
Yeah.
He felt overwhelmed, like his heart was going to explode.
Oh, wow.
And that experience became a turning point,
Okay.
where his fear of those physical sensations took over and fueled his anxiety for years.
So it's almost like his brain got stuck in a memory trap. The book suggests that past anxious experiences get embedded in our memories
Yeah.
and then can trigger new anxieties even when there's no real danger.
That's the idea.
Okay.
Our brains are wired to remember negative experiences and try to protect us from them happening again.
But with anxiety, that protective mechanism can backfire.
Exactly.
You mentioned memory plays a big role.
Uh-huh.
Can you break down how that works in relation to anxiety?
So the book gives a quick overview of the 3 types of memory:
Okay.
sensory, short-term, and long-term.
Okay.
And it argues that long-term memory is where anxiety really takes hold.
Okay.
Each time we recall an anxious event,
Uh-huh.
it strengthens that memory, making it easier to trigger in the future.
That's a bit unsettling. Is there any way to break free from this memory trap?
The book offers some hope with the concept of memory reconsolidation.
Okay.
It means our memories aren't fixed.
Okay.
They change each time we recall them based on our current thoughts and feelings.
So if we can change how we think and feel about those memories,
Yeah.
we could actually rewire our brains to be less anxious.
That's the concept. It's
Ah.
not easy.
Right.
But the book argues that it's possible to modify those anxiety-related memories over time
Okay.
with conscious effort and new experiences.
So the book goes on to discuss modern anxiety
Yeah.
and how it's connected to the stress of our tech-driven society.
Right. It questions whether trauma is the only root of anxiety.
Okay.
While trauma can definitely play a role,
Uh-huh.
the book suggests it's not the whole picture.
So what does the author say about technology's role in all of this?
He argues that the constant flow of information,
Right.
the pressure to be constantly connected,
Yeah.
and the blurring of lines between work and personal life are creating a breeding ground for anxiety.
It's like our brains are bombarded with stimulation and expectations
Yeah.
that we're not really equipped to handle.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
The book emphasizes how this constant overstimulation can lead to a heightened sense of threat,
Right.
making us feel constantly on edge.
So with this new perspective on anxiety,
Yeah.
what does the book say about treatment? Does it offer any alternatives?
It briefly covers common treatments like medication
Okay.
and cognitive therapies, but it is critical of their limitations.
What are those limitations according to the author?
He argues that they often just manage symptoms
Okay.
rather than dealing with the root cause,
Ah.
the fear of anxiety itself.
So medication might numb the symptoms,
Right?
and therapy might help you cope,
Yeah,
but they don't stop that initial fear from popping up.
exactly.
Right.
The author even talks about his own experience with medication. He'd take
Alright.
it for 12 years,
Wow.
but ultimately found it ineffective.
Interesting.
He believes it can create a dependency
Yeah.
where people feel they can't function without it.
Okay, so if medication and traditional therapies aren't the answer,
Yeah.
What does the book propose?
Well, this is where it gets interesting.
Okay.
The book introduces a surprisingly simple method
Okay.
using positive self-affirmation.
And visual reminders to essentially reprogram the brain's response to anxiety.
Wait, posters and affirmation?
Hmm,
That sounds almost too good to be true.
I know.
How does that even work?
So the method is all about creating posters with the statement, I am not sick,
Okay.
and putting them everywhere.
Everywhere.
At home, on your phone, even carrying notes with you.
So you're constantly exposed to this positive message.
Right. The book explains that repeated exposure to I am not sick challenges those ingrained beliefs
Yeah.
that anxiety is a disease,
Okay.
and that alone can lessen its power.
So instead of feeding the fear with these negative thoughts about being sick,
Yeah,
you're flooding your mind with the opposite message that you're actually healthy.
exactly.
Okay.
And what's great about this method
Yeah.
is that it's simple and accessible.
Right.
Anyone can do it
Yeah.
without needing professional help
Right.
or spending tons of money on therapy.
That's definitely sounding like something worth looking into.
But are posters and affirmations the only tools in the author's toolbox?
Not at all. The book also suggests some other practical techniques
Okay.
to help counter anxiety.
Like what?
It stresses the importance of physical activity
Okay.
to burn off those anxiety-producing chemicals.
Makes sense. Getting your heart rate up for the right reasons
Exactly.
can help retrain your brain's response to those physical sensations.
Absolutely. The book also talks about using distractions
Yeah.
to break those negative thought patterns.
Anything that can shift your focus away from that anxiety spiral.
Right. And then there's one more technique,
Okay.
almost too simple to mention,
What's that?
but the book swears by it, smiling.
Smiling.
Yes. It explains that smiling can trigger dopamine release,
Okay.
which helps counter those anxious feelings.
So it's almost like tricking your brain into feeling happy,
Exactly.
even when it wants to be worried.
Exactly. The book argues that even a forced smile
Wow.
can have a physiological effect on our mood. It's a reminder that we have more control over our emotions than we sometimes realize.
Okay.
So what stands out to you so far?
Honestly, I'm surprised by how much this resonates.
Yeah.
It's a totally different way of thinking about anxiety,
Yeah.
but the logic is compelling.
Yeah.
The idea that it's not the anxiety itself, but our reaction to it that keeps us stuck is a real eye-opener.
I agree. The book challenges us to rethink those deep-seated beliefs
Right.
that anxiety is a disease.
Yeah.
It offers a more empowering view,
I get it.
suggesting we can change our relationship with anxiety through simple, practical steps.
And the fact that it comes from someone who battled anxiety for decades and found a way out
Yeah.
makes it even more convincing.
It's not just theory.
Right.
It's lived experience, which adds a layer of authenticity and hope.
Yeah, I think that's key when we're dealing with something like anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely.
To hear from someone who's actually been there and come out the other side,
Right.
that gives us, I think, that extra boost of hope.
It does, and it makes those strategies feel more tangible,
Absolutely.
like something we can actually achieve.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already,
We have.
but there's still so much more to unpack.
Yes, there is.
In this book, Conquer Anxiety by Thomas Va Vinter.
Right.
So we'll be right back after a short break.
Sounds good. It sounds like you're really intrigued by the book's approach.
I am. I'm especially curious about this I am not sick method.
Yeah.
Do you know if it's actually helped people?
The book does share stories from people who've tried the method
Okay.
and found it helpful.
Okay.
And it emphasizes that the simplicity is part of what makes it powerful.
Right.
It's not about complex techniques.
Mhm.
It's about consistently reinforcing a new belief system.
That makes sense. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective.
Exactly.
But I imagine it still takes effort and commitment.
Absolutely. The book makes it clear that you have to be all in for it to work.
Right.
It's not something that just happens passively. You have to actively choose to engage with it.
And it encourages you to get support from friends or family, right?
Yes, it suggests involving someone you trust
Okay.
who can encourage you and help you stick with the method.
Like having a cheerleader in your corner to help you through those tough moments
Yeah,
when the anxiety tries to sneak back in.
exactly.
It sounds like this book really offers a comprehensive approach.
It does.
Besides this I am not sick method, are there other key takeaways?
Definitely a big one is how the book redefines anxiety.
Oh,
It argues that constantly focusing on anxiety as a disease might actually be making it more common.
that's a really interesting thought. Do you think it's possible that by labeling it as a disease, we're giving it more power?
It's a fascinating idea. It's almost like we're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
If we keep telling ourselves anxiety is a disease, we're more likely to experience it that way.
But if we start to view it as something manageable, maybe we can start to gain more control over it.
Exactly. The book challenges us to question those assumptions and consider a different perspective.
Oh.
It reminds us that we have more agency than we sometimes realize.
Right.
So what do you think, what's resonating with you most from all of this?
I'm honestly surprised by how simple yet profound the ideas are.
Yeah.
It's like a light bulb moment,
Uh-huh.
realizing that anxiety might not be what we've always been told it is,
Right.
and that there might be simpler, more accessible ways to manage it than we think.
It definitely encourages a shift in mindset.
Yeah.
And the book emphasizes that it's not intended as a replacement for professional help when needed.
Okay.
It's more about offering a different framework
Right.
for understanding and managing anxiety.
It's great that it provides options and empowers people to find what works best for them.
Absolutely.
Are there any other important details from the book that we haven't touched on yet?
There are a few points worth highlighting.
Okay.
First, the book makes it clear that it doesn't dive deeply into traditional therapies,
Okay.
like CBT, MCT, or ACT.
Great.
It acknowledges those approaches, but focuses on a more streamlined method, targeting the fear of anxiety itself.
That makes sense given its emphasis on a specific technique and perspective.
Right.
It's also worth noting that the book is really accessible.
Right. It's available for free
Oh, wow.
to individuals and nonprofit organizations,
That's amazing.
which speaks to the author's commitment to making this information available to everyone.
I love that it really aligns with the message of empowering people to take control of their anxiety.
It does.
But what about schools and institutions?
Yeah.
Can they access the book as well?
Yes. For schools and institutions, the book offers affordable licenses based on the number of users,
Okay.
ensuring these insights can reach a wider audience.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
The author's passion for sharing these methods and helping people find freedom from anxiety really shines through.
And it's important to note that the book is very transparent about its development.
Okay.
It mentions that the content was meticulously fact-checked against a vast database of anxiety research.
That's reassuring.
Yeah.
It means the information is grounded in solid research.
However, it also acknowledges that while some of the text analysis was done using artificial intelligence, the author himself wrote the majority of the book.
Why is that distinction important?
The author believes that while AI is a powerful tool,
Okay.
it's not yet capable of writing objectively about anxiety.
Right.
He felt it was crucial to maintain a human voice and perspective throughout the book.
That makes sense. Anxiety is such a personal experience
It is.
and requires a level of empathy and understanding that AI might not be able to fully grasp yet.
Exactly.
So even in our tech-driven world, the human element is still essential
It is.
when it comes to these complex emotional experiences.
Absolutely. And speaking of the human element,
Yeah.
the book emphasizes that it's written for everyone,
Okay.
but especially those who haven't found relief from traditional treatments.
Okay, so it's offering a message of hope
Yes.
for those feeling discouraged or disillusioned with their current approach to managing anxiety.
Exactly. It's like reaching out a hand to those who are struggling and
Yeah.
saying there might be another way.
I love that.
Yeah.
And while the book doesn't claim to be a comprehensive guide to every aspect of anxiety treatment,
Right.
it does offer a fresh perspective
It does.
and some valuable tools for managing it in a new way.
Absolutely.
It's about expanding our understanding of anxiety
Yeah.
and recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right. Everyone's journey is unique.
Right, and that's a point worth reiterating.
It is.
The book doesn't try to replace existing therapies,
Right.
but offers an alternative view and a set of tools
Yeah.
that can be used alongside or independently of other treatments.
Exactly.
It's about giving people options and encouraging them to find what works best for their individual needs and circumstances.
Speaking of individual experiences, the book also talks about the author's background.
Okay.
He's actually an IT professional, not a mental health expert.
That's interesting. How does that shape his view on anxiety?
He believes that his non-clinical background allowed him to look at anxiety
Okay.
in a more analytical and rational way,
Uh-huh.
rather than getting stuck in the traditional medical model.
It's like he came to the problem with fresh eyes.
Yes.
And was able to see it from a different angle.
Exactly. He applied his problem-solving skills to his own anxiety,
Huh?
researching and analyzing the information available to find a solution that worked for him.
It's a great example of how sometimes the most innovative solutions come from those who are willing to think outside the box.
Absolutely.
And while the book is written in an accessible way,
Yeah.
the author does acknowledge that some readers might find it hard to accept the idea that anxiety isn't a mental illness or disorder.
Right.
Why do you think that is?
He believes it's because the concept of anxiety as a disease is so ingrained in our culture, it can be hard to shake that belief, even when presented with alternative perspectives.
It's like we've been conditioned to view anxiety as something wrong with us, rather than a natural human response to certain situations.
Exactly. The book encourages readers to be open-minded, to consider that there might be other ways of understanding and managing anxiety.
It's about opening ourselves up to new possibilities.
And it emphasizes clarity over perfect grammar.
I appreciate that substance over style.
Exactly.
It sounds like the author really wants to make sure the information is clear and accessible.
He even prepares readers for the fact that the book might challenge their existing beliefs about anxiety.
Okay.
He describes the content as different because it doesn't delve into traditional theories or treatments.
It's a call to step outside of our comfort zones.
Yes.
And consider a different way of thinking about anxiety.
And it encourages readers to be critical thinkers.
Okay.
He wants them to try and disprove his claims constructively, rather than just dismissing them out of hand.
That's a great approach.
Yeah.
It fosters open dialogue and encourages people to engage with the material thoughtfully.
Exactly. It's about promoting genuine exploration and understanding, rather than blind acceptance.
What other unique aspects of this book stand out to you?
One thing that really struck me is how the author emphasizes the power of our brains. He argues that we have everything we need to overcome anxiety already within us.
That's a really empowering message. It suggests we're not helpless victims.
Right.
We have the capacity to change our relationship with anxiety.
He believes that our brains created anxiety through misinterpretations, and therefore our brains can stop anxiety by rationally reinterpreting those misinterpretations.
It's like rewiring those neural pathways that have become ingrained through years of anxious thinking.
And he's not suggesting this is easy.
Right.
He acknowledges that it takes time, attention, and training to implement this change systematically. Anxiety can be quite persistent.
It's a journey, not a quick fix, which is something the book is upfront about.
Absolutely. It states clearly that the method presented is not a substitute for medication or therapy for those who need it.
Okay. It's about offering additional tools and perspectives, not replacing existing treatments.
It seems like a recurring theme in this book is empowering individuals to take control of their own healing journey.
You're absolutely right. The author's goal isn't to convince readers with data or evidence, but to show them how they can use their own rational thinking about irrational anxiety to find a way out of their struggles.
It's a very proactive approach.
It is.
Focusing on taking ownership of your experience rather than passively accepting it.
And another important point is that the book explicitly addresses what it calls subsequent irrational anxiety. The anxiety that comes after the initial experience of anxiety.
So it's not about the root cause of that first anxiety episode, but the cycle of fear and worry that develops afterward.
Exactly. He argues that this subsequent anxiety is fueled by the fear of experiencing anxiety again, which creates a vicious cycle.
It's like being afraid of being afraid, which just makes the whole experience even more overwhelming. Precisely, the book aims to break that cycle by tackling the fear itself, rather than getting bogged down and trying to identify the original triggers.
That makes a lot of sense. It's a more streamlined approach, focusing on the core mechanism that keeps anxiety going. That anticipation of discomfort.
Right. And the author believes that by targeting that core fear, it's possible to reduce anxiety across a range of diagnoses. Rather than treating each specific type as a separate entity.
It's recognizing that there are common threads running through different anxiety experiences.
Exactly. The book encourages readers to explore alternative approaches that address the root cause of their anxiety, like therapy, lifestyle changes, and stress management techniques.
So it's about empowering people to take control of their own healing and to find solutions that work for them in the long term.
Yes.
We've talked a lot about the limitations of traditional treatment. What does the author say about how those limitations have affected our understanding of anxiety?
He argues that the medicalization of anxiety has created a disconnect between how we understand it clinically and how people actually experience it.
So there's a gap between the textbook definition and the real-life struggle.
Exactly. He suggests that even the language we use, words like disorder and illness, can be disempowering and stigmatizing.
It's like we're focusing on labels instead of seeing the individual and their potential for healing.
Right. The book encourages readers to question those labels and see anxiety as a natural human response that can be managed, even overcome.
It's about shifting the narrative from one of being broken to one of strength and resilience.
Exactly.
That really ties back to the core message of empowerment we've been discussing.
It does, and the book takes it a step further, suggesting that this focus on anxiety as a disease is actually preventing us from truly understanding and addressing it effectively.
So by viewing it as a medical condition, we might be limiting our ability to find solutions.
That's the argument. This medical model, he says, has made us rely too heavily on medication and focus too narrowly on managing symptoms instead of addressing the root causes.
We're stuck in a cycle of treating the symptoms without getting to the heart of the problem.
And the book offers a different path, suggesting we see anxiety as a natural human response that can be managed and even used for positive growth.
That's a powerful shift in perspective.
It is. It suggests that anxiety isn't something to be feared, but an opportunity to learn and grow.
He actually uses a really interesting analogy in the book, comparing anxiety to pain.
Right. He says that anxiety, like pain, is designed to protect us both, are signals meant to alert us to potential threats and encourage us to take action for our safety.
So anxiety isn't inherently bad?
That's the point the book suggests. Anxiety is a messenger, and we need to learn how to understand its message and respond appropriately.
Instead of seeing it as an enemy, we can see it as a chance to learn and grow.
Exactly. And the author emphasizes that the discomfort of anxiety is actually a key part of how it works. It's not a malfunction.
So our bodies aren't broken when we feel anxious.
Right. The discomfort is a signal, an alarm system telling us to pay attention.
But what about when it's irrational anxiety, when there's no real danger?
Even then, the book suggests the discomfort serves a purpose. It's our body prompting us to figure out what's triggering the response and do something about it.
It's like our bodies are trying to protect us, even if they're sometimes overreacting.
And the key, according to the book, is to learn how to respond to these signals without making the anxiety worse.
So instead of panicking and escalating things, we need to learn how to soothe ourselves and calm down.
Exactly. It's about riding out those waves of discomfort without amplifying them.
It's like learning to surf those anxious waves instead of being knocked over by them every time.
That's a great way to put it. The book also digs into the idea that simply trying to eliminate anxiety might not be the best approach.
That sounds counterintuitive.
Yeah.
What does he suggest instead?
He says the key is to stop thinking about anxiety altogether.
Wow, that sounds incredibly difficult.
He acknowledges it's challenging, but argues it's possible.
So how do we stop thinking about something that feels so all-consuming?
He suggests that because we often create anxiety through our own misinterpretations, we also have the power to reinterpret those misinterpretations.
It's like taking back control of the story we're telling ourselves about those anxious feelings.
Right. It's a conscious effort to change our thinking patterns, a cognitive process.
That's empowering. We're not just stuck. We can actively work on changing our relationship with anxiety.
He does caution, though, that it takes time, attention, and consistent practice to shift those patterns. Anxiety can be stubborn.
It's a journey, not a quick fix.
And it requires us to understand what irrational anxiety really is.
How does the book define it?
It argues that unlike rational emotions like fear, which alert us to danger and keep us safe, irrational anxiety doesn't have a clear purpose. It's more like a side effect of our ability to think a mental glitch.
So we can imagine all sorts of scary scenarios, even when there's no real threat.
Exactly. The book points out that all forms of irrational anxiety are triggered by something, and often that something is our own thoughts. Without those thoughts, there would be no irrational anxiety.
It's like our minds create these monsters and then we're afraid of them, even though they only exist in our imaginations.
That's a good analogy. This ability to imagine potential threats, while helpful in some cases, can really backfire when it spirals out of control.
It's like our protective mechanism, working overtime, creating anxiety where none needs to exist.
And the book emphasizes that when people talk about anxiety, they're usually talking about this irrational kind, the kind that has no logical cause and can feel overwhelming and impossible to control.
It's the kind that makes you feel like you're losing it, even when you know rationally there's nothing to be afraid of.
Exactly. And while we give different names to different types of irrational anxiety, the book argues they all share a core feature: the fear of those unpleasant anxiety sensations happening again.
So regardless of the initial cause, it's the fear of the feeling itself that becomes the main trigger.
Exactly. And the book suggests that instead of treating each type separately, we should focus on addressing this core fear of anxiety.
It's about recognizing the common thread that runs through these different experiences.
Right. And to understand how that fear takes hold, the The book breaks down what happens in our bodies when we experience anxiety.
It describes it as a collection of simultaneous unpleasant reactions caused by the body's chemistry.
It's a whole body experience, not just a feeling. The book stresses that anxiety is never just one symptom. It's a cluster of physical sensations, thoughts, and emotions that all feed into each other.
It's like this overwhelming wave of unpleasantness.
And the book makes a really important point that unpleasantness is not a flaw. It's how anxiety is supposed to work.
So it's not a sign that our bodies are malfunctioning.
No. The book argues that the discomfort is a signal, an alarm meant to alert us to possible threats.
But what about when those threats aren't real, when the anxiety is irrational?
Even then, the book suggests the discomfort has a purpose. It's telling us to pay attention, figure out the trigger, and take action.
Like our bodies are trying to protect us, even if they're overreacting.
And the key, according to the book, is to learn how to respond to these signals without making the anxiety worse.
So instead of panicking and escalating things, we need to learn how to soothe ourselves and calm down.
Exactly. It's about riding out those waves of discomfort without amplifying them.
It's like learning to surf those anxious waves instead of being knocked over by them every time.
That's a great way to put it.
This has been an incredibly eye-opening deep dive into the world of anxiety. We've explored a whole new way of thinking about this common experience and uncovered some practical tools for managing it.
If you're ready to challenge your beliefs about anxiety and explore a different path, I encourage you to check out Conquer Anxiety by Thomas Faw-Vinter. It's a thought-provoking read that could change your life.
And remember, it's available for free, so you have nothing to lose and a world of peace of mind to gain. Until next time, happy diving.